Iron Lung is not for everyone. Certainly not for those who had no idea what they were getting into, or those who just don't have a good attention span, or had theirs ruined by social media. It's also not for people whose interests in cinematic productions and releases were conditioned by the recent obsession with constant and obnoxious noise and action, a billion cuts, different camera angles, and chaos flashing across the screen every 5 seconds. Before we get into this review of sorts, please note that this video contains spoilers for the movie and that my interpretation of the story and my opinions on this movie are out here for you to discuss respectfully. I am not an expert on the story behind this movie or the original game, but anyway, hi, I'm Muffs, and I'll try my best to talk about Iron Lung, tell you my thoughts on the movie, and while you listen to me, make sure to enjoy the fan art I drew for the movie, which is playing as the background for my voice, and don't forget to support my content, leave a like, subscribe, comment, all of that. Please, it would help a lot. And I also just want to note that I'm back to having university classes, so it's been pretty hard to actually make content for you guys, not only on this channel, but also my many accounts across social media and the different kinds of content I do that you should also kind of check out if you're interested. But anyway, let's just move on and talk about Iron Lung. Markiplier made this movie based off of the 2022 video game Iron Lung by David Szymanski. Szymanski? I am so sorry. I'm probably saying this name in the worst way possible, and I don't want to offend anyone, I swear. Shockingly, it came to theaters in my country, Portugal.
Oh, you're so Portuguese.
I was not expecting that, right? Anyway, I think it's important to mention that Markiplier stated in an interview with IGN that the movie and the game have different canons. They have separate stories, and in this video I will only discuss the movie, but of course the movie is influenced by the original game. I'd also like to say that Mark is one of my favorite content creators ever. He motivated me to learn English around 2014 or something like that, when I was 7 or 8 years old and when I was given access to the internet. I always grew up learning English though, because my mom, who studied it when she was younger, speaks fluent English, so English to me was always a second language of sorts, along with Portuguese, but it was only after I got obsessed with Mark's videos, fell in love with gaming, Pokemon, and just digital content that I had access to the internet that I decided that I was gonna put in more effort than I already was to learn English well enough and understand everything I was getting into. And now we're here. I'm turning 20 years old in, I guess, a month, as of the recording of this video, of course, and I speak fluent English ever since then, ever since I started putting more effort on that. I never stopped caring about Markiplier. I am trying my best to use the internet as a way to share my work and passion for the arts and some other stuff for a while now, and it's so crazy to me that someone like him, that I've always had as a role model of sorts, is now showing up in Portuguese theaters. But let's just move on to the actual review and talk about the Iron Lung movie. So let me just give you a quick synopsis. Iron Lung follows the story of Simon. In this world, humanity resides in space, forming two separate societies, if that's how I could put it, after an event called the Quiet Rapture took place and planets and stars have suddenly vanished. We have Eden, where Simon resides, and the COI, the ones that captured him and make him take the place of the unknown convict we play as in the original game. Eden had or has the last trees known to mankind, and they organized themselves as what I interpreted as some sort of cult, worshipping trees and believing that humans have to sacrifice themselves in order to become the soil for new trees to grow, or a new tree to grow. The COI captured Simon because he was responsible for killing a lot of their people in conflicts between both societies, and it's also implied that he helped or was responsible for blowing up COI's filament station, making it inhabitable. If Simon wants to be released and regain his freedom, he must now go through the Convict Realization Program, working for the COI and research a moon covered in an ocean of blood in an attempt to restore data and resources that are vital for humanity's salvation. Throughout the 2 hours of the movie, we see that the ocean of blood and the moon itself is alive. It moves along with the creature that resides there. Simon has to use an X-ray camera to see what's outside of the SM-13, his ship or submarine, and we basically follow along as Simon cannot think straight about what he's doing, and honestly, it's justifiable. He had no salvation, and it's pretty clear that the visions he sees and the strange hallucinations he has throughout the movie are all part of glimpses at the future, at the fate Simon will face eventually. There was no going back or leaving the ship alive. And well, as he is constantly exposing himself to huge amounts of radiation, not taking enough caution when exploring his surroundings, and we generally just get a very silent and immersive movie that makes you slowly follow this man's descent to madness and his inevitable death. What I'd like to say, just to close off this synopsis, is that if you want a more detailed and honestly just a perfect breakdown on all of the movie's story and everything it had to offer, check out this video that is showing up right now on screen by Mr. Hunteru. Now let's move on to my actual proper thoughts, and let me start off by talking about the good things and the good aspects and characteristics, the things I loved and adored about this movie. So, the movie is slow, and that was actually perfect for the narrative we are presented with. The scenes are long and silent, which forces the viewer into paying attention to what exactly is showing up on screen, whether it be the sapling on Simon's hand, the one he holds onto dearly, or the expressive look in his eyes whenever he's concentrated on his next objective. And continuing on this matter, one of the other characteristics of the movie that I loved is that we never see Simon go outside the SM-13, making Iron Lung a claustrophobic masterpiece with high tension at all times. This, along with the great sets, gloomy lighting, and comfortable ambience and overall look of the ship, made me feel completely immersed in the movie and in this story, but also made me realize that Simon was actually doomed from the start. The monster, or Ellie as the character designer named it over on Instagram, is probably the highlight of the movie's sci-fi horror aspect, if that's how I could describe it. It is basically confirmed that this eel or fish-like creature is made out of humans that had previously explored the Blood Ocean, and honestly, the way they barely show you the creature for the X-ray visuals and that final scene when it tries to eat the SM-13 and Simon is impeccable. A great way to not expose a real threat instantly, but still keep the viewer curious, paying attention to the story, and just generally not losing interest in what's about to happen. The parallels between Simon and the title that is given to him and the god he's faced with are such a smart move. On the writing aspects, on the writing of the movie itself, Simon is called the Butcher by many characters in the movie due to the crimes he has committed. He's in constant denial about the actions he has done, but the movie ends with him accepting the title of the Butcher and his fate. So we can suppose that the Quiet Rapture was made by some sort of god, the eye Simon sees in his hallucinations, in an attempt of turning our reality familiar to its own, to the place it came from. But as we all know, even if this god made the Quiet Rapture by accident, it still killed a lot of people. So the movie kind of presents us a god, a godly and divine being, believing that its murderous actions were necessary or justifiable with the excuse of it being an accident or an act in the name of a greater good. And Simon kind of going along that same logic of denial, denying the truth, but ultimately facing it and coming to terms with it, makes the two characters have parallels between them. So the god is interested in Simon and sees him as a vulnerable person that might want to join him or join it because of his background, and since they're similar in the way they're both in denial about their strength and the weight of their actions. And my last point for this section is that the movie is faithful to the original game's pacing and overall gameplay and visuals, but also allows itself to innovate, which is awesome and probably the best thing we can make out of the Iron Lung movie at the end of the day. Now let's move on to the bad things, the things I disliked about the movie, or just things that I have to point out as fair criticism. The audio, and I really hope this was not an issue that happened because of technical issues in my theater, or the theater I went to actually. I highly doubt that, but I felt like Simon just had a clear diction and we could always hear him perfectly, but then sometimes Ellie, Ava, and some of the other characters were a bit muffled at times. It's not that the dialogues were not constructed well, it's that sometimes it was pretty difficult to hear why Simon was reacting to some things the way he was, because we couldn't hear what was being said to him and what was actually happening in certain scenes. The English captions helped out on this aspect though, but if I was watching the movie in a session that had no captions, maybe the audio would indeed be a huge issue for the comprehension of the actual plot as it moved forward with the dialogues. This movie is not friendly for those who are not familiar with what they were getting into, and I have to recognize this because I know it will be a huge issue for many people. If you don't really know what the Iron Lung game is about and how it plays out, it's likely that you will deem this movie as confusing, boring, empty, and non-action filled. This also depends on personal opinion though, and even though I believe the industry in gaming and cinema has had for the last few years a weird obsession with constant action and unnecessary exposition at all times, I feel like the movie should have made some more things clear in terms of exploring the background that was a bit left out when the game's narrative was adapted for the creation and the production of the movie. The ending itself, like of the entire movie, to me, was pretty good, but I do understand that for many people, the ending was unexpected and kind of, how do I say this, off-putting and not as explicit in terms of like narrative as it should have been. But anyway, now this is a new section for my reviews, and it's called the in-between. So something that I feel like was neither bad or good. It was just complex, way too complex to deem as one or the other. The ending section of the movie and the tragic beauty of everything that happened is something that I cannot say is good or bad, or just good or just bad. It left a bittersweet taste in my mouth after I left my seat, and don't get me wrong, I love tragic endings when they have a great build-up, and I believe Iron Lung accomplished that. A slow and immersive experience that ends in a lot of action and tension. The last 15 minutes or so pick up the slow pace and turn it all around. You receive a lot of information, some gory elements start showing up on screen as Simon is consumed by the blood ocean, and even though it was clear to me personally that the SM-13 was becoming one with Simon and following the steps that the crew that turned into Ellie took previously, I believe that it was quite overwhelming to receive so much in such a small amount of time. That was an intentional and smart decision in my opinion, to make this movie slow, claustrophobic, and silent, and then bring in all of the action and intensity towards the end. I liked that a lot, but it also left me with this feeling of having some questions left to be answered after what looked like to me a cryptic attempt to answer to some aspects of the movie. A lot of people online have used these last minutes of the movie against its greatness and quality, which is a shame, but also quite reasonable and understandable, in my opinion. I understand that someone who would have preferred a fast-paced and action-filled movie will say that this last section was the only part they enjoyed. And even though I understand that the industry standard and what many people tend to prefer is exactly what the movie delivered at the end, a ton of action and chaos working towards Simon's death, and the hope he was able to give to humanity by saving the black box, I kind of feel like that this ending being a double-edged sword. It closes off the movie pretty well, but for those who didn't like Simon's slow, 2-hour-long descent into his tragic fate, will probably feel like the movie's potential was wasted in some way. I agree that the attention span of many has been affected by social media, and I believe some people were not able to comprehend the story of the movie simply because they struggled to go through these 2 hours with enjoyment. But I also believe that it's absolutely unfair to bash the movie because you wanted its entire structure and pace to change in order to be more appealing to your specific tastes. Moving aside from the technical and narrative aspects of the movie, I'd like to end this video by saying that Iron Lung shows the industry how once again the internet is indeed a strong weapon for someone, a team, or a project to achieve worldwide success and an audience to consume their work. It also teaches us exactly how an audience will become loyal to a public figure or artist they admire and support them unconditionally, as long as it all feels right, as long as they're raw, genuine, and relatable. Essentially what we're seeing is a guy who came from doing silly videos for the internet to experimenting with interactive cinematic productions for YouTube, now being able to achieve a huge and successful theatrical release and run with his self-financed and self-distributed 2-hour-long movie. There's a real story here, one that is easy to like and to feel inspired by. Iron Lung was made by a team that feels human, authentic, and with the rise of generative artificial intelligence and the never-ending fear of the artistic industry excluding those who are not privileged enough, the whole project ends up becoming a mark, no pun intended, in recent years on how to triumph in the middle of so much chaos going on around the world. You are free to disagree with me on anything I said in this video. I just ask you to understand my point of view and be more mindful in how you engage with the points I'm mentioning here, for example. I personally think that a lot of people are not responsible in the way they consume media, and while we have to be aware of the excessive misinformation that goes around the internet and so on, we have to take a step further and be part of a change we want to see. I try my best to promote critical thinking and respectful online and offline discourse and discussions by following and, of course, engaging with creators and people who have those same beliefs. So before I finish this video, I just really want to say this, like, be careful with how much time you spend on the internet, obsessing over the negativity and lack of nuance behind everyday news and content. I spend most of my time drawing, writing, dancing, and honestly, I do spend a lot of time consuming content and the internet in front of my computer to work on my academic and personal projects and just to understand what's going on around the world and be inspired and just feel like I'm learning things every single day. But I believe the best thing that I did in recent years was to connect myself with my work as much as possible and use the internet and, I guess, social media solely as a fuel to keep me going. Distance yourself from your phone, for example, if the only thing you're taking from it is a sense of dread and emptiness. But enough of me ranting. Let me end this discussion by telling you that Iron Lung is incredible. Not perfect, of course, but it's so raw and immersive. Hope that there is a space for all of us artists who want to put out so much out there and just find our communities and find people who are able to enjoy the worlds and the stories we create inside our heads. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Muffs and I'll see you in my next video.